See ya.
Yeah, same here. Looking forward to this.
All righty. Well, just to make sure we've got lots of time for Bill, I want to welcome everybody. We've got a big crowd today. It's super exciting. Just a few Zoom etiquette things. I think most folks are on mute right now. At some point, we'll open it up. If we are open and your mic is live, make sure that, and you've got background noise, please just, mute yourself. And at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat function. Feel free to open that chat up and send questions to us or comments during, and then we'll definitely trying to leave room for some Q&A at the end. I want to just take a few minutes to talk about Bill. I first met him just a few weeks after I took this job here at Eastern Sierra Land Trust, when he donated his whole campground out at Benton for an ESLT event. And it was the first time I'd been out there, and it was in early June, and it started my love affair of Benton. I mean, it's just amazing out there. Bill's family's worked on the land at Benton Hot Springs Ranch for nearly a century. Could someone mute Lorraine for me? And as the property's third generation rancher, Bill's committed to making sure that that tradition continues. In 2000,
Old Benton, where the hot springs, the tubs are.
Hey Scott, your mic is live.
Oh, I am so sorry.
That's all right. And in 2018, Bill partnered with ESLT to permanently conserve 900 acres of Benton Hot Springs Ranch as a conservation easement, or with a conservation easement. Because of his foresight, this unique place with water resources, historic ties, ranching legacy, diverse wildlife will continue to benefit the Eastern Sierra community for generations to come. And in 2010, Bill joined the ESLT board and served on our lands committee, helping get into our queue and for completed projects, helping us move conservation projects forward. And here's the part where I'm not sure if I should say this or not, but I'm gonna give it a try, and I'll probably pay a price for it. It's already hard enough to get reservations out there, but Bill and Diane have created one of the most special places in the Eastern Sierra out there. Not only the old town, which he's gonna talk more about here in a moment, but that campground, you can go there and you can sit under the stars. You can sit in natural hot tubs filled with natural hot spring water. And it's like stepping back into a time that is quieter. I can go out there for one night and I feel like I've been on vacation for a week. It's so beautiful out there. And Bill, I just can't thank you enough for what you're doing out there, for what you're creating, and of course for being here tonight, and for everything you're doing to protect this special place. I think right now we've got a video we want to show you, and this was taken a couple years ago by Paul Page. So here it goes. And Bill, do you want to, I'm going to turn it over to you now, Bill.
Well, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be with the Eastern Sierra Land Trust, to be able to talk about Benton Hot Springs property. And this little notch that you're looking at, and so much of the property, is extremely unique from the standpoint that, in geologic times, that notch right there was part of the outflow from Mona Lake and out through deep wells and down through Adobe Valley and Black Lake, and then down through Benton. And it's one of the largest places that you find this kind of a ecology as far east as you do, because of that drainage effect. And one of the reasons why Benton has always been a very popular area for not only earlier settlers, but obviously Native Americans, way before the white people immigrants started coming into this area. But if the area that you're looking at, the 900-acre conservation easement, is part of an area that my family, that we have grazed, and in addition to public grazing permits that we had with the BLM and Forest Service, as well as we had a ranch just 6 miles north of here. And so we've always had a livestock operation and alfalfa on our other ranch. And with that, when you move into the town area, we have at this point with a 900 acre conservation easement, we also have 335 acres or 55 acres that are not part of conservation easement. And it's basically the area that you're looking at right now. It's, there's more to it to the east. You can barely see to the south the Benton Paiute Reservation that is just south of us. All around us otherwise is Bureau of Land Management lands. There's only a 40-acre parcel at the very north end of our property. And it pretty well goes, it's fairly narrow, but it goes about 2 miles towards Benton Station, US 6. So the uniqueness, I think, ecologically of this area is pretty obvious. And I think the other part of it is, for us to be able to take care of it, we've had to look at how we can have a business that doesn't necessarily detract from the beauty and the uniqueness of the land, but at the same time, like Kay had introduced it, allows people, the public, to come and enjoy it. And it's very rustic. It's, you know, we're very remote. We don't have a lot of amenities in terms of our business, but what we do have is a very unique hot spring. The hot spring itself is probably 600 to 900 gallons a minute, which is a huge flow. And you can see the ponds just there in the slide that the hot water is eventually the creek that comes down from the spring. The entire town, the entire property is below the spring. So we have the beauty of gravity flow and feed for the entire, all of the buildings, all of our tub sites, our houses. And then from there, we just use the water to irrigate with. But we heat all the buildings in town with the natural hot water. It's our only drinking water that we have. We don't have a well on this part of the property at all. The conservation easement, the 900 acres, was extremely straightforward because, you know, I didn't want any subdivision or development. And so working with the land trust, we were able to get an easement that protected the conservation values of the property there. What I'm struggling with is this portion of the property, which is we have not only a historic town from 155 years ago, but we have the uses and the activities that we have that we're providing right now with the tub sites and the camping and the lodging, and we do have a bed and breakfast with that. And luckily I married the right woman because she's just fantastic and being able to deal with this sort of thing. But we got started with this. Both of us had a Forest Service career, and she cut hers short so that she could come here and help with creating a business that would help take care of the property. And so that's kind of where we're at today. I'm actually, I think a lot of people know that I'm third generation, you know, on this property. I'm a 5th generation Californian. And my family's been here on this property for 92 years. But this property wouldn't be here in this almost ghost town state, which it is, kind of frozen time, unless it was not for my grandparents. And my grandparents were extremely, you know, independent, hardworking. They ran the store across the street. They ranched. They grew alfalfa, and all the time they took care of the town, the old town of Benton that was still here. And the store, the stone store that was in the slide previous to this one, It was built in 1872. It's probably one of the most significant buildings in Mono County in terms of age and the fact that it's still being used. At this point, we don't have it open, but we do use it for some of our nonprofit efforts. And you know, it's such a gem and resource. A lot of the antiques and valuables from town that were retained over the years are all still in the old store. And you know, to the extent that we can, we continue to work on keeping the old buildings. Like I said, my grandparents for 70 years ran the businesses here, and they resisted selling the place. They opposed, you know, being told to tear down some of the old buildings, and you know, they just took care of the place to the best of their ability. And my great-grandfather was the one that actually purchased the land, and he purchased it mainly to get away from his other businesses, and I think sometimes maybe his family at that point, but they were all living in Little Lake and Downey, California, and he had a number of businesses, including well drilling and a bank of Downey, and he was an early race car driver. And so when he came to Benton, he wanted to come up here to hunt ducks and deer and grouse and get away from a lot of the other places and people. And he bought it from a man named Warren Davis. And Warren Davis was an extremely interesting guy. He was quite the entrepreneur. He had bought Benton, you know, from a company that was mainly mining at that time. Mr. Warren Davis was a miner himself, but he saw the potential and the benefit of having like a dude ranch and using the natural hot springs in the early days here in Benton. He bought it in 1913 and kept it through 1928 when my great-grandfather purchased it. And he purchased it from this group of people in this photo. They were called the Benton Company. And if you look at the photo, it's an extremely interesting photo. We used it in one of our events because the people who are seated, the first three people are people that had formed the Benton Company, and they were reopening mines. And so they bought it in 1906, and they operated it until they sold it to Warren Davis in 1913, 1914. The guy who is in between, kind of with a shadow on his face, sitting there on the left-hand side, was named Fowler Remington. And Fowler was a real shaker and mover of Benton. His wife, Gail, and daughter lived here in town, and he was a postmaster. He operated the newly constructed Wawira Hotel, and he was also the Wells Fargo agent. I just found out recently that he was the secretary in Mono County, for Mono County as well at the time. But unfortunately, he was in the middle of an audit in 1913, and for whatever reason, Mr. Means, who was an auditor from San Francisco, had come over and was going through his cash drawer and asking him some questions. And so he excused himself and walked across the street, cleaned himself up, drank a bottle of arsenic, and then he dropped dead in the middle of the road in front of the old store. And that was pretty much the end of the Benton Company. At that point, that was the last real effort for people to try to reopen all the mines on Blind Spring Hill where most of the silver mining had happened, and to renovate the town of Benton. And so what I'm doing, if you hadn't noticed, and I apologize for not mentioning it earlier, is that we're backing up in time. And so when the Benton Company when they came in 1906, they had purchased the land, the estate, from a guy by the name of John Milner. And John was, he was quite a miner in Benton in the late 1870s, early 1880s. And he came into a lot of money from a uncle in New Zealand. And so he named his mine that he had, the Wawira mine, the hotel across the street that was built in 1905, 1906. Basically a year he was under construction and died before he was completed. John Milner was during a period in Benton's history from 1880 to 1906 that I considered to be sort of the dwindling years of Benton. And that was because there was a lot of the mining and the silver mining in Blind Spring. There was a group from San Francisco that were mining that played out a major swindle on the town of Benton. And they essentially robbed Benton of continuing to keep the mines going. Most all of the mines had to partially shut down or totally shut down. They took out most of the money, the silver that they could get out of it, and they left a lot of people unpaid. And that was kind of the start of the 1880s and the kind of the decline. In the middle of the 1880s, a good share of Benton that was wooden structures, the earliest part, some of Kelty's, some of Robert Morrison's buildings, some of the early hotels. There was a fire in 1880 and it took out most of the whole portion of town, right directly across the street from the old store. And today, if you know anything about Old Benton, there's a big structure there. And that structure was moved into the area that burned in 1894. And that is the structure that I currently live in. That structure was built in 1866, and it was moved from another town half a mile from here, which I'll get into in a minute. But by the time that Milner started trying to consolidate the mining, what was going on in town, a lot of the old timers, such as Jane Lynch, who she had run most of the hotels in town, and a lot of the bars that were here early on, and the lumber yards, a lot of the people had died. And so the Benton Cemetery was being filled up by a lot of the old timers, the docs, the folks that were here as pioneers. And Milner started purchasing all the portions of land from the many families that lived here. And so if you can imagine a town that was lotted and owned by a whole bunch of people, John Milner was the guy that started pulling all that together. And this is a picture here of the Wawira Hotel that he had built at the end of his time. He died of an infected tooth, and he was actually in San Francisco trying to have it taken care of at that time. So the heyday in Benton was really the period from 1876 to 1879, a very short 4-year period. But, you know, if Milner's period was the dwindling period, that was the roaring Benton period. They had, the population was somewhere between 600 and 900 people. It varied over those years. There were clubs popping up everywhere. They had horse races. They had dances that were attended by people from, you know, all the way from Owensville down by Bishop and Bishop Creek, Round Valley, all over the country. That was the time when the mines were doing the best, silver mining on Blind Spring Hill, and the 4 or 5 other mining districts that were that Benton served. Since Benton was the closest mining district was Blind Spring Hill, but they served all the way over to Mammoth during that period. They had 2 newspapers here, probably 4 hotels, many, like a lumber yard. It was just a going town. And so prior to that, from 1869 through 1875, that was a really tough period for Benton. And the first thing that happened, I got a little bit out of order, so if you can back up maybe to Robert Morrison's grave, there you go, thank you very much. That during this period in 1869, there was what they called the yellow pine fever. And a lot of people recognize that, you know, it was a strike in Nevada. And just like what happened to Aurora, when Benton and Owensville and Montgomery City all went off, people left Aurora to go to those camps. And the same thing happened here in Benton. In 1869, the population dropped only to 94 people. And before that, there had been significantly more. The other significant thing that happened was probably the most important man, the first man merchant in town. He had taken his building down in 1864 and moved it down. He was a merchant in Montgomery City, where they were mining for gold. And that was just about 4 miles or 5 miles away. And so Robert Morrison moved his business here. He was the first merchant in 1865. And at the same time, the town of Partswick started about a half a mile away. And a guy by the name of Dr. Parts, he was a major influence in 2 or 3 of the major mines on Blind Spring Hill. He allotted Partswick, and between Benton and Partswick, they had a little, you know, duel going on in terms of what town was going to be the largest and the best. And so Morrison, unfortunately, in September of 1871, there had been in Carson City, there was a jailbreak, and a whole bunch of the escaped convicts had stolen some Henry rifles and headed south. And the posse from Aurora had picked up their trail, and they trailed them all the way to just this side of going into Adobe Valley past Mona Lake. And so the sheriff from Aurora had sent a message ahead to Benton to have a posse, you know, relieve them because they were all worn out. Well, Morrison and Sheriff Hightower, and Hightower was a prominent businessman in town, and he was also the sheriff at the time. He was also the one, by the way, that built the stone store across the street. They formed a posse, and they trapped the convicts, found them, got on their trail, and they trapped them over there in Diablo Lake, you know, just kind of east of Mammoth, which is now called Convict Lake. And there was a gunfight. You know, Morrison and most of the Benton folks had pistols and shotguns, and with these Henry rifles, they just pretty much got outgunned, and Morrison was shot and killed. So that was a real depression on the growth and the history of Benton during that period. But the thing that was even more important after Morrison was shot and killed was that a guy by the name of Eugene Kelty, one of the first people in the area, the town business people had found out that he had filed for a land claim that included all of the businesses in Benton. And he was well respected. He was a county supervisor. Folks, they called him Pop. Kelty, and he had his saloon here and hotel, and he was very popular. But that for about 3 years, no one wanted to build because of that hanging over the town and the growth of the town. And so mining still went on. Parts was doing fairly well during that period, but the Benton just didn't seem to take off and grow. And it was only after that, when in 1876, when the decision was finally determined by a judge in Independence that Kelty's filing fee would be returned to him, because they denied it. And the town, then all the folks still own the land, and they felt like they could go out and continue expanding and growing. So that was kind of the period that really should have been part of the heyday and wasn't. But if you go any earlier, after people come into Benton, the history with the Native Americans was always, the hot spring here, the uniqueness of the meadows and the springs, in addition to the hot spring. It was always very important to the Paiute people here. And so when the first people started coming into the valley, there was actually, the first report was actually from a party that was associated with the Fremont Walker Group in 1845. They had split off, and Edward Kern and Lieutenant Talbot, led by Joseph Walker, had camped in Benton at the hot spring. And there had been a man by the name of, later, of course, that wasn't his name at the time, but they referred to him as Rattlesnake Washington. His son was named George Washington, but he remembered seeing the group of first white explorers coming through Benton, camping near the hot spring at that time, and that was the first contact that they had from outside the local area. And the second one was a very unfortunate event. A man by the name of Taylor, who was a partner with Bodie, and it was before Bodie really started happening in terms of the development of the town of Bodie. He was hired by a guy by the name of Eugene Kelty, same guy, even though Eugene was never at Benton until about 4 or 5 years later. He was sent and commissioned a man to run some oxen, horses in this beautiful valley. And during the middle of E.S. Taylor was his name, who was the partner of Bodie, and running the cattle for Kelty, and he built a cabin down by the spring that's on the conservation easement now, and down by the lake. And that house that was built there, he was living out of it at the time. And in 1862, in December, there were no other white people in the area, except periodically they would come through on their way to Aurora, going to a mine. A man had shot a Native American at the hot spring, and the local Native Americans got very upset about it, rightfully so. Went to Taylor and informed him it was time for him to leave. He wouldn't leave. He had a gun, a rifle, and he shot and killed 10 of them before they were able to burn him out and kill him. And so we had kind of a tough start with people between the Native Americans and the early miners and immigrants to this area, as a lot of places all over the West. And it's one of those times in history that, a lot of us wish we could just ignore. But I think it's an important thing with, me being, and anyone else being a student of history, to try to be as truthful as you can about stuff like this. And So, you know, there's probably a dozen other really unfortunate situations that I could point to about the early Native Americans, but a couple of things that I wouldn't consider to be positive, but were meaningful around Benton was that most of the Native Americans were forced to live in their own camps, kind of at the edge of Benton. And since their livelihood was pretty much taken away, they were, you know, forced to live, work at menial jobs. A lot of them became they chopped wood, worked on ranches, and, you know, did whatever they needed to do and whatever they could do to try to survive. And one job that stood out around Benton was carrying the mail. That there weren't any other white immigrants that could move the mail like the Native Americans. But in addition to a lot of the stories of Native Americans about, if that earlier picture that I had of the Benton Company, the 5 or 6 men that were all on the right-hand side of that picture. One thing that when I started researching and found pictures like that and researching these people, I couldn't believe that I actually found some people with photographs. And so looking at that, half of the people in that photograph were married to Native American women. And so a lot of the early miners and ranchers in this area, you know, that today, you know, the Rambos, the Salks, you know, the Kellers, well, there's a dozen others that I can think of. Those folks, the mothers were all Native American and the fathers were white. And so many of those folks now are either in Bishop or on the Benton Cemetery or live in this area. The Wattersons was one of the people I was thinking of. But it was kind of their start and involvement here in the Benton area. And so it's kind of a interesting thing to look at, you know, how interrelated, you know, by force, because very few of those Native American women, I think by choice would have done that. It was probably out of the need to feed their family and survive. And so trying to understand and learn the history of a place like this, and that's part of what our nonprofit is doing and part of what we're trying to have with a lot of our efforts to educate people with our historical. We have an interpretive sign over by the old store now, and we have a number of probably 5 or 6 brochures that we put out. And we have a self-guided walking tour that we've done, and those kind of help educate people and enrich people's life a little bit when they come here and they stay at, you know, a place that has history as well as just a very unusual and a very unique place. One of the last things I wanted to talk about has to do with relationships, and I believe in life that relationships are the thing that really give our lives the purpose, the meaning, and the fulfillment in life. And I look at, in my way of looking, I see 3 important relationships. And one is the relationship with our Creator. The second one is most what people think of when they think of relationship, and that is the relationship with other people, their spouse, their friends, and groups like the Land Trust. And then the third is the relationship that we all have or we can have with the land. And that's something that for me and I know a lot of people with the Land Trust, that's why you're involved. It's such an important aspect of our lives, is to continue to do what we can with all of our relationships so that we have a healthy, strong relationship. And so one of the things I wanted to mention was how important my relationship with the Eastern Sierra Land Trust has been. If I get choked up here, I'm really sorry. But You know, 20, 30 years ago, people like myself with private land that wanted to protect it wouldn't have much choice. And with a land trust, it's been a wonderful opportunity to protect some of the land that you have a close relationship with. And I've only done 900 of my 1,255 acres, and I have a long way to go, but I'm just hoping that my relationship with the land trust and that I can find some entity in the future that can take over the care and protection for this place. So with that, I apologize for the tears, but that's the way it is.
Bill, that was amazing. Very powerful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I too am very happy with our relationship, and I hope we can keep working on some exciting projects together.
Well, to the whole Eastern Sierra membership, staff, supporters, anybody who contributes to the land trust, if they think at times they wonder what they're doing, putting this money out, please, by all means, realize that there are private landowners all over with special pieces of private land that they have a very special relationship with, that they want to be able to protect it. And not all land needs to be developed, not it, to the point that maybe it could be that would, like in my case, I considered the development around here that would be possible, such as, subdivision and having little ranchos or putting in a hot spring resort with a high level of development. To me, that would ruin the place. And I don't ever want to see that happen here. Like I say, I'm still struggling trying to figure out, how I have an entity after I'm gone and my wife is gone to do that. But those are the kind of challenges that we all have in life. And I'm just so thankful that I have the land trust to work with on placing at least conservation easements over it that would prevent something like a future development that would subdivide the property or overdevelop it. So thank you so much. Thank you, members of the land trust and all the leadership. You're doing a great job, and I really appreciate everything.
Thank you, Bill. Our partnership with you is amazing, and like I said, I hope we can carry it forward in some new ways. We are a smidge over time. I don't know if you have more time. I don't know if, well, first, do you have a little bit more time, or do you need to sign off?
I do. I have plenty of time.
Okay.
My time is not a problem.
Oh, okay, well then I'm just wondering if anybody, we could unmute. We have a large group, so we need to be careful with some background noise, but if anyone has any questions or comments for Bill and his amazing place in the history out there, you can raise your hand and we'll call your name if you'd like. Roger. Oh.
Bill, I wanted to say I'm a member of the Eastern Sierra Land Trust, and I wanted to say I thought your speech to us was remarkable, and I really appreciate what you do, and I think your sentiments are awesome. So thank you very much for investing the time with us.
Well, thank you, and thank you for being there.
I think I saw a couple other hands. Bryn, okay.
No, thank you. That was amazing. And for a place that I'm familiar with, it was just so fun to hear those details and to see the pictures. I have a question specifically about your research on the history of Paiutes in the area and how you went about that. And if there are books or resources that you could guide us to learn more about that long history.
Well, most of the information that I've been able to obtain, we had a historian that worked for us for probably maybe 8 years, and for our nonprofit. And most of the information he was able to generate. And like, for instance, you know, there's a very well documented description of the murder of Billy Edwards and by a Native American boy and what happened. And the history on that really didn't play out once we started doing more research. And even some of the Mono County sheriffs wanted to propose, you know, elect Edwards as a possible future recipient of an award they had. And I don't think that it would really be worthy in a case like that, because I believe what happened was a case of self-defense. Whereas the Native American, you know, Billy Edward died, the Native American went to San Quentin, and within 2 short years, he died because of pneumonia. And so that was a very unfortunate situation. But I've tried to work with the Benton Paiute Reservation, and there's not a lot of history or a lot of interest. I think there's some more interest than what I realize and what people generally realize, but they readily admit, the current chair, you know, Dennis Salk, he readily admits he knows very little about Native American history around the area, because I've asked him to attend some of our past nonprofit meetings and talk a little bit about it. And so, like I say, most of the stuff that we've been able to acquire has been really through, you know, researching documentation related to it, and where we've found a few family members that knew a little bit about past incidents. And, you know, we've been able to, we've got, there was a woman who was an early historian in Benton by the name of Camilla Jenner, and she interviewed Tom Buckley, who is a Native American here, and got a lot of really good information from Tom, because, you know, he knew his family very well, and a lot of the stories that got passed along. And so those have really been the places that we've been able to find much information.
Thank you.
Tony?
Bill, I've heard you tell this story on several occasions. I know you're invested in the foundation for your foundation, and I think it doesn't need to come out right now, but I'd be really interested in what when you look ahead 25 years, 50 years, what do you see out there in Benton and Benton Hot Springs?
I think it's really simple, Tony. I see an entity like the Eastern Sierra Land Trust taking care of the property, managing the property. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity to model, have projects that model conservation. You know, we didn't even talk about the DACE project down there, but the opportunities are endless. But in terms of conservation projects, but really, I would see an entity like the Eastern Sierra Land Trust or the Historic Benton Hot Spring, which I just don't think. I mean, essentially, my wife and I are the local nonprofit, and I don't believe that I'm ever going to be good enough. I don't have the skills and the energy and the enthusiasm to develop a nonprofit that would take care of the property into the future. I question that, and I think it's possible, but it's not something I've seen much hope for at this stage. But that's kind of what I have in mind, Tony. I mean, in terms of the business that's here, it only is to the benefit and the value of people, the public, using and enjoying and experiencing not only the hot water, but the very unique experience that you can get out here. And I believe I think that's a charitable type of effort on the part of an entity, a nonprofit. And that's kind of what I see for the long run.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you for your presentation today, too.
You're welcome. And thank you.
I saw a couple other hands earlier. Jean?
Hi, Bill. It's Jean Evenden. We worked together 25 years ago, and I just wanted to say hi, and really nice to see you. And I had followed the land trust acquisition of your property and thought that was great, and just really have a lot of gratitude for hearing about it firsthand from you with this opportunity. And I won't take up much time, but I'll just say I hope to catch you at Benton Hot Springs one of these days on my way through.
Thank you.
And thank you so
Good
much.
to see you. Yeah.
Yeah, you as well.
And this is Kay. I'm just going to make one little distinction that sometimes gets, it can be confusing. So Bill still owns his land. He is the landowner. He owns that land. We have a conservation easement. So we were able to acquire a conservation easement with Bill at his land. So we help in other ways. Basically, we purchased the development rights and we're in partnership with Bill, but he is the landowner.
Well, I would just like to add, Kay, that I don't have to be.
A new campaign, let's go for it.
You know, you just never know how much time any of us have in this life. And it's just so important to try to get, you know, your affairs in line before it happens. And my biggest fear is, you know, without a family, you know, that has an interest in it and has shown an interest, my biggest fear is that, you know, I die and it just gets sold and developed. I mean, that's my largest fear. And of course, 900 acres of it will never be developed. Only 355.
Well, let's talk. We're speed dial next week.
Absolutely.
Would anyone else like to add anything? Well, Bill, thank you so much. I learned so much today, and it just helps give depth to the story I know out there and your story of place, and your connection to place inspires all of us. And I thank you for that.
Well, and I want to thank you as well, and all of you for attending and listening, and even having the interest and hearing about Benton. It was just a thumbnail of it, but when you start really looking into any place like Benton, the history is so rich, and it would be such a bad thing to allow that history to totally be lost. And so, to the extent that, you know, I've always kind of wondered about Bishop, you know, and they have a lot of history around Bishop and laws, and I would love to see, you know, more of it taken care of, like Bodie, you know, just all of our history in the Eastern Sierra, I think, is rich, and I think that's how all of us that have been given something like a Benton need to approach it. You know, they need to approach it and do the best you can, you're capable of taking care of that and sharing it with people, because otherwise it does get lost.
And you know, Bill, the other night at our story hour, we were sharing stories of places in the Eastern Sierra and some history. And Yvonne, she was here earlier. I'm not sure if she's still here or not. Yep, I think she is. We kind of thought we'd like to put together an ad hoc, I don't know what the name of it's going to be, but something where we can start compiling the history of the region in ways that aren't already being told. So if anyone's interested, pop me an email, and in a month or so, we'll try to see if we can get something going. And
I'd love to. I'm not a historian, but I love the history and I'm passionate about it.
yeah, obviously it touches. Marie, you're on mute.
Pardon?
Oh, Marie wants to say something, but she's on mute.
Oh,
There we go.
What, you couldn't hear me? I just, you know,
hi,
Bill.
Marie.
Hi, Bill. It's great to see you. Thank you. That was a excellent presentation. I was out at your place, if you remember, I think it was about 6 years ago, as Kay was referring to, and what a special place. And like the rest of us, I so enjoyed hearing more about the history and seeing you again. And hi to Diane. And congratulations and take care.
Thank you.
Well, if anyone, any questions or comments percolate up, feel free to reach out to us and we'll get back to you with any answers or comments. And I just want to say thank you again for coming tonight. That was so inspiring, Bill. And tomorrow, if you're participating in the Bio Blitz, we've got, we're closing that out tomorrow at noon, and then tomorrow night at 5 o'clock is our paddle race. Thank you, Roger. I've got you in my ear. So thank you guys so much. Bill, you have just got us to this place in a very powerful way. And there's a lot of things for us to think about and move forward on. I just really want to thank you.
Well, thank you for your work.
Thanks. Okay.
Thank
Bye,
you, Bill.
folks.